So small and medium businesses face the similar challenges of large businesses in their data communication needs. I know one of the core issues that I get talked about a lot is managing costs. How can they handle costs more effectively?
Yeah, that's a big issue for small and mid-sized organizations. The other thing we're seeing too is that, when you look at this, it looks fairly straightforward internally, right? If all I'm doing is calling my colleagues, my coworkers, or whatnot. Once you go outside that business, outside those walls, which more and more small businesses and medium-sized businesses are finding they have to do, they want to do. They want to work with partners, with customers all over the place. They also have employees who are located now more and more all over the place, not necessarily coming into that one location, right? So although it's a much smaller scale, in some ways, some of their needs actually do mimic those of larger organizations. And being able to address those can actually let them compete with those larger organizations much more effectively.
So with problems with data growth and trying to manage your costs, what are some solutions that are out there for businesses?
Well,
I can talk to one. We're actually standing in front of a little drawing here that sort of typifies how a lot of organizations connect, right, to the internet, connect to the telephone network, right? So this is pretty typical. You've got computers and telephones within a location, let's say, and it's on a LAN, and you've got an internet connection, and you've got some sort of a telephone switch that's there that connects to the PSTN. So they're all set up and they're working away, and that's all good. This is a little bit of the before picture, right? SIP trunking is actually a service that can greatly improve the efficiency of this kind of an arrangement, right? It actually uses less network. It allows for the ability to consolidate equipment and do less management.
So how would a company looking at this try to address these issues and look at convergence as a way of solving some of these problems?
Well, I like this before picture because now I can create an after picture, right? The way that SIP trunking works, and I'll just sort of get into this a little bit more, is it actually allows you to run your voice traffic and you reach out to those entities outside of your network by using the internet or by using a data network. SIP trunking is very interesting in that what it does is it allows you, this is the PSTN, or the public switch telephone network. It's the telephone network. And you can access it through your internet connection. So what you're literally able to do then is there's a connection that exists that a service provider can give to you and allows you to make your telephone calls through your internet now out to the PSTN and the rest of the outside world. And that really allows you to be able to reduce your number of connections that you have and that you have to manage and that you have to pay for. So this connection here can carry both your internet traffic and continue to do that as well as your voice traffic out to the PSTN. So it reduces costs in a lot of ways, reduces management, and increases efficiencies in many ways.
So are all networks capable of providing this kind of converged network infrastructure?
Well, more and more providers out there are starting to provide this service. And if you go onto Google and you type SIP trunking, you're going to see an awful lot of them. So it's becoming much more prevalent. I think people are now beginning to look at it more seriously, right? Voice over IP has been around, and SIP trunking has been around for some time, but it's really coming into its own now. And it is not just limited to, say, large or complex or sophisticated networks. It's now being made available to businesses of all size. So you can be a small business or a small, medium-sized business and absolutely benefit from something like this.
You may need to do some upgrading internally. And certainly if you're a small and mid-sized organization, right, you want to look for a provider that gets that. And isn't going to treat you like a small version of a large organization, right? But it's going to give you solutions that are really designed, purpose-built, for small and mid-sized organizations. That's very important with this technology.
And I can imagine you're really looking for a provider that can provide secured networks as well as class of service to make voice a priority.
Absolutely. So some of the things that people have learned along the way, and bumps that they've hit in the road, for example, is, yes, I'm running my internet traffic over this, and now I'm running my voice over the same connection. That's wonderful. But when my users start downloading some great big files, it affects my voice, and that's not acceptable, right? And so being able to manage quality of service, give priority to that voice traffic so that it, when you're talking on the phone, you don't know that there's data flowing, that's the key, right? So it's important when you're looking at options to understand and be sure that that provider can do that for you. That's very important. Security as well, right? It does take some planning, some upfront planning, potentially some upgrade. There are security concerns that you need to take into account as you look at your infrastructure and say, is this ready to carry voice over the internet? So things like firewall, policy upgrades, that sort of thing are very important too. So you need to engage with somebody who's able to help you out with all of those aspects.
And that is one of the big challenges, I think. It's one of the sort of roadblocks that we see when we ask people, well, how come you haven't yet deployed this? It's been around for a while. The biggest reason we get is quality of service. And a fear of, well, if my internet connection goes down, now what? I have no voice, right? So you need to also make sure you have redundancy built in, so that if that does happen, and we all know sometimes it does, that you can still make those really important phone calls.
Yeah, let me add to that. What several people that we've worked with actually have done exactly that. So they've set this arrangement up, and they're carrying their traffic over their internet, and yet at the same time they can always leave behind or keep in place another connection, say a local connection to the PSTN that ultimately gets back to here through some lines, so that in the unlikely event something were to happen here, you're still alive, right? You can still make a call. You can still make an emergency call, like a 911 call if necessary.
Yeah.
And this is a very common kind of a deployment method now.
What are the minimum requirements, though, that companies need to have to get involved in this?
Yeah, you'll see again when you look around, people offering SIP trunking services sort of to all sorts of businesses.
Yeah.
Ours, for example, is scalable all the way from the largest organizations all the way through down to locations of, say, 20 users or 10 to 12 trunks. So it's pretty small. Beyond that, if you're even a small business that's smaller than that, you do need to do the math, right? Make sure that the upgrades and the work that you need to do in order to set it up is offset by the savings that you're going to get by using the common connections, right? So it's an important point to note. But for small, medium-sized businesses all the way through large, good providers ought to be able to give you a scalable solution that can serve all.
And you may need to do some investment to upgrade your network, but that's why we encourage customers to look at the overall value picture too. Because there's a lot of downstream value that comes from doing this. It's not just eliminating costs, right? I mean, you can now start layering on some more advanced communications much more easily. You can then manage those, provision them much more easily. So that's a big part of it. And then also being able to start to support what we call the virtual workplace, where you've got people located not in your office necessarily, but working from home, traveling a bunch. Especially for small and mid-sized organizations, that gives them a lot more flexibility all of a sudden, right? They can expand into a new region, for example. They don't have to open a whole office and get an IT person in there and do all of that. I mean, they can literally have one person working from home, testing the market, for example.
Right.
But you want them to look professional. You want them to look like they're part of your organization, have single number dial and all of that stuff. And now you can get that even as a small or mid-sized organization.
So how is this different from a voice over IP solution? Does a business need to have this and VoIP, or can they have this just separately?
Yeah, voice over IP is a very broad term, and it kind of generally refers to any form of voice that's being carried over IP or over data. So the notion of a SIP trunk is a trunk service as opposed to a line service. So there's a distinction there, and it operates typically in conjunction with this little telephone switch. Now, this may be a large private branch exchange, which is what PBX stands for, or it could be a smaller key system, right? There's different sizes of boxes. So voice over IP in general, you may, if you, again, look around, there are different styles of voice over IP. You do need to talk to somebody that's knowledgeable to sort of say, well, what kind of service do I need, right?
What is preventing more adoption into SIP?
Well, I think as Melanie mentioned before, it's been a while in incubation, I think, and there are certainly some fears. Interestingly enough, there are also a lot of people out there that have got lots of this old legacy business and are kind of not interested in selling, and making these available because of the savings that you'll get. And so obviously different people come at it from different angles, but I can certainly say from our company's perspective, we're absolutely committed to working with users to broaden their their efficiency, their productivity, and using tools like this, even though it replaces old services, you've got to get with it, right? And you've got to go with the next generation of service.
So SIP trunking is a great solution if you're looking to save, if you're looking at changing your existing infrastructure because of it being obsolescent or it's already no longer supported by its vendors. What else would be a good point of time for businesses to look at this?
I think anytime that you're looking at growth or anticipating any kind of growth, and even if that's relatively modest growth, because SIP trunking really allows you to support that very easily and cost effectively. And the other thing is, if you're looking at trying to start deploying some of the more advanced, what we call advanced communications and collaboration capabilities, those are generally going to perform better running over a data network. You want that convergence at the network level for management purposes, but also just for performance.